Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Aviation Sustainability Africa podcast. This is a podcast that explores the implication of socioeconomic sustainability and climate change for the global aviation industry with a particular focus on the African continent. It features interviews with experts from airline, airports, civil aviation authorities, think tanks, tourism bodies, and other organizations with emphasis on ESG. The podcast will help us to gain insights into the latest trends and developments, the challenges and possible solutions, technological innovations, and the changing mindset towards sustainability in the aviation industry. My name is Tony Kachuku, and today I'm happy to host Kwame Bekoe, who is an aviation professional with a broad technical and commercial background, comes from a successful career spanning 20 years. He started his career with Airbus in engineering, where he led high-profile projects designing Tier 1 aircraft structures, to commercial, where he developed expertise to lead and support the marketing and sales of aircraft before moving to GE Capital Aviation Services, where he provided leasing, financing, and business service solutions to clients across Africa. Following an MBA at London and Columbia Business School, he joined Zero Petroleum, a rapidly scaling London-based startup that is developing synthetic SAF, and he remains committed to supporting the industry decarbonize and meet sustainability goals. Kwame is the Director of Commercial at Zero Petroleum. Welcome to the show, Kwame.
Very much, Tony. Good to see you again.
Fantastic. So just dive right into the podcast, and then we'll see how this flight takes us. So what opportunities and challenges do you see for Zero Petroleum in the African energy market?
So, just as a brief introduction, I'll just talk about the company. Zero Petroleum is basically a synthetic stuff company. We're a producer. Very distinctive from BioSAF, which is based on a feedstock which is of biological origin. We're a synthetic SAF company. Essentially, what we do is we take the elements of air and water, so hydrogen, carbon dioxide, to produce a drop-in grade hydrocarbon, which is essentially SAF, basically. So we've been working on this technology for several years, about 3-4 years. We've tested it, we've proven the model, the technology. We're at the stage of scaling the technology now. So that's essentially what we're doing. And so your question is, how can this be of benefit to the African continent? I think one of the things we all know is that Africa is a continent of great feedstocks, and be it feedstocks of biological origin, based on the land resource, the water resource, but also with regards to the natural resource, the ability to produce renewable energy, which is a fundamental feedstock of this type of fuel. This is where we see a huge opportunity for Africa to play its role in helping to decarbonize not just aviation, but all the other sectors that need decarbonizing.
Fantastic. So thank you for letting me on how Africa can play a part. So how can the synthetic fuels contribute to Africa's energy transition and economic development?
So when we talk about synthetic fuel, obviously I've mentioned what it is. Essentially a fuel that is produced from an unlimited feedstock. And when you think of the fact that this fuel is produced from just air and water, the opportunities are endless. I mean, for us, we believe that this is going to be the type of fuel that displaces fossil fuel, number one. And number two, it's really important to know that liquid fuels are always going to be with us. One of the things that I typically say and we observe is that when you look at just, the history of the world and the revolutions that we faced, most of these revolutions have been driven by a change in energy. So, talk about the steam revolution, electrical revolution, and coal and oil and gas. We truly believe that we're presently in the stage where we're undergoing an energy revolution under this energy transition. We're moving from types of fuels that were linear in nature, where today we've been extracting oil and fossil fuels and burning them to push and drive economic development. But in the future, it's going to be circular. So basically we're going to absorb and take all the elements we need to create the fuel. And when you combust that fuel or use that fuel, it goes back into the atmosphere in a circular nature, which is not as damaging to the world as fossil fuels have been. So, I mean, for us, we really feel that the opportunity for Africa is to leapfrog again. We talk about many leapfrog opportunities, present energy sources, but also leapfrog to become self-sufficient in energy. For us, we believe that this is a type of fuel that almost any country in the world can produce, because all you need is renewable energy. Every country has some form of renewable energy. Every country has water, access to water and, the atmosphere. So you're moving from a stage where you have about 22 countries producing 90% of the world's hydrocarbon liquid fuels products to a stage where you can have almost every country being self-dependent on energy. And when I think about the benefits for Africa when it comes to that, I mean, it's endless. It basically means that you can reserve your exports and your expenditure, and you're not necessarily exporting a mined product to re-import a product, paying 10x of the difference. So this can have a huge benefit if it's gone about the right way.
Thank you, Kwame. So you said, I mean, this is an opportunity for Africa to leapfrog, and there are opportunities that come with this. Do you think this transition to energy will help to alleviate poverty in any way? Will it create jobs? What opportunities comes with this transitioning, or this leapfrog, into energy?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's a great opportunity for job creation. I think one of the things we are aware is this energy transition is going to happen. The energy transition is going to happen. It needs to happen. Because obviously we're facing this, sort of climate catastrophe if it doesn't. And for me, it's the companies, it's the organizations, it's the nations that embark on this goal to drive the energy transition to the new type of fuels. Those who have a head start, those who are able to support the development and the setup of this type of fuel will be the winners down the line when it comes to the next, century, whereby we feel that this will predominantly be the type of fuel that will be driving industrialization in the future.
Thank you. So, how have you been engaging with, or if you have, with African governments and regulatory bodies to support the policy change and adoption of sustainable aviation fuels and the push to get zero petroleum to achieve its mandate?
Again, that's a really good question, Tony. And obviously, we're in this ecosystem. It's a very novel space. Obviously, sustainable aviation fuel, all types of sustainable aviation fuel, make up a very small percentage of the world's fuels being used today. I think 0.1 or 0.2%. So it's very small. What we've seen is many nations are putting in place mandates to basically require operators who are flying into certain jurisdictions and regions to start using these fuels as a means to move to lower carbon fuels. Now, the question is really, can you really mandate developing nations? It's a very topical subject and debate. Clearly we know that there are many challenges that Africa is facing and needs to overcome before it can get to the stage where it has a vibrant industry, it has a blossoming sector, which is truly bringing the benefits that aviation brings. And for me, it's definitely a step that needs to be taken. There are many challenges that need to be addressed before you can start adding to, the impact of sustainability. Because the fact of the matter is, initially, the cost of this fuel is going to be the order of magnitude 3 or 4 or 5 times more expensive than regular conventional fossil fuels. And the fact of the matter is, the aviation model can't absorb that cost, let alone the aviation model in Africa, which is burdened with many other issues. So I think it has to be a staged approach. There are nations in the world whereby the government is providing support systems, incentives, where there are market-based measures and different structures that can help, sort of cushion this delta in price. But it may not be the case for many emerging countries, but there are some ways in which emerging countries can position themselves to take the benefit or the upside of this transition. And I feel it's just something that every airline, every operator needs to be aware of what is happening and understand how they can come on board and how they could contribute to really bringing down the overall impact that our sector has on climate change.
Thank you, Kwame. I don't know if I've asked you this, but I know that uh, Zero Petroleum has its focus. I mean, and countries and regions that it wants to first of all go in these developmental stages. I don't know at what stage Africa is, in your phase approach, but of course, this is our podcast is focused on Africa and what
Yeah.
solutions Zero Petroleum can bring to it. Now, I want to ask you. Are there any logistical or infrastructural challenges of transporting and distributing SAF in Africa? I mean, of course, I know that we're still in the early stages, but do you foresee or what solutions can be brought to bear when it comes to, logistical and infrastructural issues?
Yeah, good point. So just on your second point, basically with regards to logistics, distribution, transportation, the benefit with SAF and synthetic fuel is that you can use existing infrastructure to store, to manage, basically to distribute this type of fuel. So unlike, electrification or hydrogen, pure hydrogen, whereby you're going to have a huge need for, additional capex and infrastructure spend if you were to support, say, an all-electric aircraft or a hydrogen-powered aircraft. That's a major blocking point. But the advantage is this works with existing infrastructure. And then with regards to, our roadmap in terms of where we see ourselves investing, obviously we're a UK-based company, growing in the UK, but we're also targeting markets like in the US, where you have policies and benefits like the IRA, who support the development of plants such as this. We're looking at places like the Middle East and Australia and Japan, very publicly, by the way. And we honestly do want to get to the place where we're starting to plan operations in Africa. But it's about, again, having the right landscape and ecosystem and enabling environment to flourish this. This really does take an ecosystem. It takes government, it takes policymakers, it takes the people who are ready to offtake, so the airlines. It takes the customers who are ready to pay that delta or support that transition to sustainability. It takes, local consortiums, engineering firms, EPC companies. It really is, holistic, sort of ecosystem that is needed to make that step, because it's such a huge expense, I would say, in terms of that needs to be done to get through building plants that is going to be producing this scale of fuel. That you need that support system in place. And a startup like us isn't in the place to do that. But, one of the things we are doing and I've been doing actively is talking to people and engaging with people and showing them what needs to be done to really bridge the gap and create that pathway to actually get there. Because as I mentioned, there's just so much opportunity in Africa to be a leader in this space. And I mean, when I talk about Africa and the abundance of renewable energy, one of the things that I often mention is that, like, you just take 2% of the land in the Sahara Desert. Because of the solar intensity in that area, you can generate enough electricity energy to power the whole world, essentially. There's places like in Namibia, we're looking at very actively, that has a huge potential to develop SAF that we feel, it will be a no-brainer if you don't start looking at it. And elsewhere, I mean, like Kenya, Rwanda, you look at the geothermal potential of renewable energy to generate SAF, it's enormous. Ethiopia, with the dam project there, there's just so much potential, added potential. The capex is already spent to basically produce energy to develop SAF. Even in West Africa, with solar and wind penetration is actually really good in that region, because solar in the day provides, a huge amount of, of course, resource and green electrons, and it's balanced quite equally with the wind that can be generated in the nighttime. So there are so many different opportunities and prospects and, projects that can be studied, but you really just need the right level of governance, the right level of investment. Investment comes with, better risk appetite and risk profiles, and operations, airlines, off-takers. So if anything, what we're doing is really trying to build this so that we can create that structure.
Fantastic. I mean, basically, that's what the Aviation Sustainability Africa podcast is all about, to kind of get people like you as stakeholders in the sustainability ecosystem, to look at how your innovations can help project Africa. Of course, Africa has a whole lot of potentials. You've just mentioned them in renewable energy. There are a lot of fallow, low-hanging fruit that just needs some policy and investment drive to make it, something sustainable, and of course, create employment as well. And of course, like you mentioned, leapfrog. So, which is why we're having this conversation, because Zero Petroleum is a UK company doing a whole lot and looking to people that, of course, you go to areas where there is support, and we're looking at, okay, we're in Africa, how can also expose what you are doing in this continent to see how the off-takers can begin to look at what you're doing, and of course, look towards partnership, which is what brings me to my next question, to say, what partnerships or collaborations has Zero Petroleum formed with African businesses, organizations, and communities? I know you've mentioned countries where there are potentials, but are there any ongoing conversation, or you're yet to start? Tell me about it.
Yeah, good point. So, obviously we're at very early days with regards to Africa at the moment. So many of the relationships we're building, discussions we're having are at a very, very early stage. I mean, I've started talking to many of the airlines already, in our network, that we know about the opportunity and what can be done. With support from Africa, we know they have a division that is focused on SAF that we're trying to actively engage with. So you have these bodies who are, sort of have the same mission and drive. But I think ultimately what we're trying to do is to bring the governments on board. We think once you can bring the governments on board, once you can create that kind of foundation whereby there is that interest and they see that opportunity, we believe that that brings everything else into play. Almost like setting up a PPP, a private public sort of partnership kind of structure. So we are early stages now. We have had success outside of the continent, and we wish to replicate that in Africa. And I think once we're able to do that, with the amount of, again, we've spoken about the resource and the opportunity to develop very cheap, low-cost renewable energy, that is going to be a real winner for this sector. Because as you know, price of fuel is the major, one of the major hindrances to SAF and the SAF rollout. No one wants to pay for expensive fuel, particularly where you have, fossil fuels trading at historically low rates. But we believe some regions in Africa can actually compete very well with fossil fuel. In fact, one of the things we believe is that synthetic SAF that we're producing can reach cost parity within 10, 15 years. And that's we're very ambitious. Again, going back to the founders and the heritage of our company, was actually founded by Formula One executives. So actually 2/3 of the initial team that joined came from Formula One. And anyone who knows anything about that sector is it's very driven. It's all about technology, innovation. It's all about chasing the decimal places, and really just for us, what the focus is about driving down cost. The winners in this space are those who can really drive down cost the fastest possible. And we use data, performance, and so many tools to be able to do that. And again, Africa has a huge potential because of the renewable energy that companies like us, we want to tap into to create low-cost SAF. And it's about who can we partner with, how can we establish these networks and connections and governments to make that happen. So that's what we're working on at the moment.
Thank you, Kwame. You already mentioned it, but I was going to, what you mentioned was leading me to my next question, which was, but of course you touched on it, but maybe you can elaborate more, was how will you ensure that, SAF becomes affordable and accessible to African consumers and industries? Of course, you just mentioned that it's going to take maybe 10 to 15 years because, affordability and accessibility remains the key word because sometimes, innovations really, when they first come out, really seems to be very expensive until when they now begin to scale, and reach a wider range of people. But Africa has got a great market. It's huge. We've just not tap into the numbers. So apart from looking at 10 to 15 years, are there any incentive or innovation looking at making it to go, okay, since we've got renewable energy to tap in, can it, make it faster to be more affordable and accessible?
This is this is a really important point because obviously, we've spoken about the importance of having that, sort of price and cost stability. That's so crucial, particularly for aviation, where 30-40% of the operating costs are down to fuel. And it's very clear that in this sector we can't absorb 2x or 3x cost of fuel. So this is something that we're working on. One of the things we often say with regards to cost, and many people speak about synthetic fuels, power to liquid fuels being much more expensive, of course, than conventional fuels, but also biofuels. But when you think about additionality, you sort of put to bed that sort of argument, because obviously when it comes to the production of the fuel, you're not always taking electricity directly from the grid. Our philosophy is we want to be located right by the power generation. So for instance, if it's in the Sahara, we want to be right there next to the solar powers. We want to be at the geo power stations. We want to be next to the hydro dams, because the grid very often is very limited in how much energy it can actually take from these power sources. So what we're using or what we're spending is energy that can't actually be used by the grid, or to some extent is not really going to serve a purpose. So this energy comes at a much lower cost than any other energy that can be produced. It's really clear to understand that we're using additionality. We're using energy that is in addition to what is already going to be used by the grid. But also the other factor of the matter is many people, when you talk about SAF, don't think about the improvements that you can gain from SAF. And this is something that we're beginning to work on and research at the moment, because SAF, particularly synthetic SAF, can have many advantages in that we can produce a clean fuel that can give much lower maintenance cost on engines, but also we can engineer the fuel to give it certain properties and characteristics. We can give it better energy density, for instance, better viscosity, or different properties like this. And imagine having a tailored fuel for an operation like operations in South Africa have this type of fuel, and it's going to give aircraft X% better performance. Recently, we were looking at regions like in Australia and in the northwest of the US. If we were to give them a fuel with better energy density, how much additional payload can they carry? And what does that actually equate to in terms of revenue benefits? So there are some performance benefits that can be gained from the use of synthetic fuels. species down the line, there's still a lot of research going into it, and certification needs to be done. But I think the key thing to bear in mind is synthetic fuel is on a rapid cost down trajectory. It's not at commercial scale yet. And of course, just like any other industry, it's going to go through that cost down benefit, as we bring together the different elements and integrate the different elements of what is used to produce this fuel. We bring about different types of benefits in terms of these two features working together, like the electrolysis and the synthesis unit, which is part of the SAF development. When you get these working together, you get additional benefits in terms of energy and cost of making the fuel. So there's a lot happening in this space. And honestly, Tony, like I started working in self-sustainability like just a year ago, and the amount of technological improvement and benefit is mind-boggling. It's really amazing. I go to some of these conferences, 1 year on, and you see the technology and the drive and the cost down and the policy and everything that is changing. That makes it very assuring to see that, number one, we are going to get to the place whereby soon everyone is going to be using SAF. I really believe that. Already Airbus, Boeing, the OEMs are committed to making aircraft, sort of certifiable, able to use 100% SAF by 2030. New engines will be able to use new types of SAF that don't have the, typical jet engine parameters of aromatics in them, which is very new. And, the cost is just going to keep coming down. So, one of the things I believe is this will be a driver in our industry. It's something that we're going to see a significant amount of change on year until we get to, obviously we're working towards a target net zero by 2050. But we believe that well before then, there are going to be economic benefits and performance benefits and maintenance benefits by using this type of engineered fuel. And I think it's just really important that even though at the moment many African airlines operators may not be looking at this space, it's really important to observe the pace of change and to identify where there can be opportunities for you to leverage improvements or benefits or, production or, partner with players like ourselves, to develop facilities. So I think that's what I advise people to do at this stage.
Thank you, Kwame. I mean, you really hit made some salient points there, which brings me back to the conference we are organizing. As you know, we have kind of refocused and really looking deep down on aviation sustainability, South African Aviation Sustainability Conference. You've mentioned something vital. I mean, because we don't want Africa to be left behind in this innovation and this, leapfrogging of energy, because the global aviation is a global world now. We are looking to always at our conference, but that is focused to Africa, of course, get these eggheads that are disrupting the industry, providing the solutions so that we can also move along and tap into these solutions that are being offered, not to, lag behind. So as we are moving, the world is moving in the sustainable manner. Africa is also in that level, with the trends, with the technologies, with the innovation, so that it's not always, us being handed these things, but, we go ahead to look at you. I mean, yes, you're in the UK, but of course, you're an African as well. So, you have to be in that conference as well to also talk about what Zero is doing and how Africa can tap into it and the ecosystem as well. You mentioned this renewable energy and the low-hanging fruits. People in this other sector can see how they can now partner with Zero on the African continent to bring these solutions. And then, of course, the opportunities are massive.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of the things, I think I have to like, they have a really good platform online, which shows the amount of offtake that has been made and pledged by a number of different operators all across the world. And bear in mind, some of these offtake agreements, they don't necessarily have an immediate down payment need for some of these airlines make offtake. It shows a good sign and interest to move towards that direction. It doesn't necessarily mean money out of their pockets immediately. It's a bit disappointing to see that I think we're yet to see any offtake agreements from African airlines. But one of the things I truly believe is that, Africa makes up about 2.5% of, the worldwide ASKs at the moment. I honestly believe that Africa potentially could be the first continent to use 100% SAF entirely, even just based on the amount of resource, feedstocks, capability that is in the continent. Even just thinking about biofuel, which we don't think about, there's so much potential. Talk less of power to liquid. Africa could literally supply the whole world, supply itself, and literally lead the world when it comes to SAF, not just from a sustainability point of view, but from an economic point of view. And, it could really support the industry as a whole. And I also think it's important because Africa as a continent is disproportionately impacted by climate change. Obviously we have a huge infrastructure gap in the continent. I think it's over $100 billion gap per year, which means there are not sufficient roads, bridges, dams, and all that kind of stuff. So climate change impacts, in Africa, you see the impact of climate almost on a day-to-day basis. So to some extent, that interest or that driver should be there more than many other regions, I feel. So yeah, I think that's the way I feel about it. Yeah.
Thank you, Kwame. I must be realistic with you. The African leaders and governments are really not focusing on sustainability at the moment. Yes, we've noticed that Kenya is really doing great stuff when it comes to climate change, hosting conferences and all that, but more has to be seen to see that Africa moves towards, sustainability, tackling climate change, looking at, SAF. You are not only providing solution for the aviation industry. It's transportation as a whole, So tell me what potential do you see for Zero Petroleum technologies to support Africa growing transportation and industrial sectors? Now we are going to the broader transportation value chain.
Yeah, so I think one of the things that's good to know, important to know, is that the same process, the same technology we have also produces gasoline. It also produces diesel products as well. In fact, it produces all types of hydrocarbons, all types of liquid fuels or gases, light ends. So we can, in fact, create a plant that can produce fuel that is required by whatever industry. And it's not limited to aviation. We're speaking to people in automobile sector, in agriculture, in mining, data centers. We're talking to construction, shipping. So in fact, this is a way to produce a product, a fuel that can serve different purposes. The key advantage is, you construct a plant using our technology. You're not confined to just producing jet fuel. If there's a huge demand for diesel, e-diesel or e-gasoline, you can seamlessly switch. There's a process, but you can switch to producing sort of lighter end or heavier end hydrocarbons, which is a big advantage. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because recently I read a stat that in the informal sector, I believe it's quite an old stat, but the kerosene, you remember the kerosene we used to use in Africa for lighting, the kerosene used in the informal, in the rural sector in Africa is almost more than US aviation. When you think about the amount of this product that is harmful to health, by the way, when you think about the products and the fuels that are used for cooking and for domestic purposes, there's so much avenue to change and disrupt. So it goes beyond aviation. And the benefits are not just economic, but it also, health, and employment, and the list goes on. So for us, what we're doing is presenting an opportunity to governments. To many, it's a no-brainer. It's a great opportunity to transition Firstly, to be a net producer of your own fuel, which, for me is going to have a huge benefit to any country that you talk about. And then to really drive change, drive industrialization in a sustainable manner. So this for me really is a means to really transform the landscape of many of the challenges we face in the continent.
Thank you, Kwame. I mean, there has been in some of my interviews, people have really argued that to get SAF is going to take aviation a very long time because of the number of plants and feedstocks, and then they would not have the land. But there's something critical that I just mentioned, that with the renewable energy we have already, it's a low-hanging fruit that can be tapped on to leapfrog this energy, and that makes a whole lot of difference. I never thought about it in that manner. I was saying, this seems true. I mean, how many land do we have to possess to plant to now convert to SAF, and all that is going to take a number of years, but renewable energy makes it easy. Now, in closing, Kwame, it's been an insightful interview. How do you envision Zero Petroleum's role in supporting Africa's sustainable development goals and climate commitments?
Yeah, good. So again, really what we're doing is we're continuing to talk. We're continuing to demonstrate. We've tested this fuel. We're working with our partners, Rolls-Royce, sort of Boeing, many others in the sector, to demonstrate the capability of this fuel. We're going through a certification process. But above all, we're working on just bringing down the cost. And I think for me, once you can demonstrate that we're able to bring the cost down to a certain level, obviously you're going to need market-based support, policies, government to cushion, that sort of remaining bits to bring it to a place whereby it can make business sense to airlines and operators, and those at the lower end of the chain. That for me is the inflection point at which point people switch, and it's like, okay, now we need to grow. It's really just about scaling up the development of this product. And I think for aviation, you made a point just before, to decarbonize aviation, I think many have mentioned this, is going to cost about $3 to $5 trillion between now and 2050, which is however many billions every year of investment. One thing to bear in mind is the issue we're facing is about capital allocation, because a fraction of this amount is spent every year on new oil wells, fossil oil wells. Every single year, this amount is spent. It's not beyond us. The money is there. Sustainable aviation fuels is proven, it's demonstrated. We've seen so many demonstration flights and tested so many engines. And now it's really a case of scaling up and rolling out and allocating the funds to support project builds all across the world. That's the challenge that we're having at the moment, capital allocation. So that really is going to be our message to governments, operators, to really support, because once you have the ecosystem, once you have the airlines saying, we want this fuel, the government saying, we'll support this fuel, the passengers saying, yes, this is what we want, this is what we expect, then that's what changes at the market. And that's what draws in the capital. It entices the investors, it draws in the capital into this sector. And that fundamentally is what will change the landscape, not just in Africa, but all across the world.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just been listening to Kwame Bekoe, who is the commercial director for Zero Petroleum, a startup company based out of UK. It's been a pleasure talking to you. I look forward to having you on African Aviation Sustainability Conference coming soon to kind of also shed light on what Zero is doing with a focus to Africa. And I'm hoping that sooner than later, there will be some kind of partnership announcement from Zero of what it's doing with African governments or countries in Africa. Thank you very much for being on the show, Kwame.
Thank you, Tony. Thanks. Catch up soon.